What's going on, guys? Kalipis Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the Umidigi Power 5. In this video, I'm going to be going over everything you need to know to help you decide if this phone is the right one for you. Now, before we go any further, I do want to remind you to go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It helps out the channel a lot. But with that being said, let's get into the video. So this phone has a 6.53-inch LCD display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 160, and an aspect ratio of 20:9. We got a water drop notch up here for the front-facing camera, and this camera is 8 megapixels. I'm not a huge fan of water drop notches, so I don't really care for this look up here. It makes the status bar look a little bit messy. I think hole punch cameras look a lot nicer and cleaner. But as for the rest of the phone, the bezels are pretty thin, and it does have a nice modern touch to it, so I don't mind it at all. I especially like the back here. I think this material has a really cool finish, and it really doesn't pick up fingerprints all that much. We got the Umidigi logo right here and their slogan as well, and I think it blends in really good. Overall, besides the water drop notch on the front-facing camera, I do think this phone looks super nice. As far as the display goes, this is a pretty average display for its price range. 6.5 inches is pretty much the standard display size you're gonna see today. And 720p is pretty common for an entry-level phone. Overall, I do think it's a good size for content consumption. So if you're streaming videos, viewing photos, playing games, that sort of stuff, everything's gonna look really nice on this phone. I will say the PPI is a little bit low. For storage, this phone has 128 gigabytes with microSD card expansion, so that's not bad at all. In fact, for a phone in this price range, that's actually really good. You're not going to see a whole lot higher than this until you get into the higher end phones and flagship phones. If you're a power user, this is going to be great because you'll have plenty of space for apps, photos and videos, all that sort of stuff. And even if you're not a power user, even if you don't think you're going to need all that storage, it's still a good idea to have extra because apps in the system and pretty much everything are all getting bigger and bigger these days and taking up more space, so having more is definitely better than having less. There's no wireless charging with this phone, but we do get a fingerprint scanner right here on the power key, as well as face unlock. Let's go ahead and give this fingerprint scanner a try and see how well it works. There we go, one more time. And there we go, as you can see, unlocks real fast. I have no complaints. So taking a look at the rear camera setup, we got a 16 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel ultrawide camera, and a 5 megapixel macro camera. And in addition to this, one feature Umidigi phones tend to have that no other phones really do is a thermometer, and the thermometer is right here. I'm not quite sure how many people are going to find this feature useful, but I do think it's a really cool feature to have, and it's something that definitely makes Umidigi a little unique and more memorable. But back to the camera of this phone. Overall, for an entry-level phone, I will say this camera is okay, but in certain areas, it does leave a little bit to be desired. So this is a photo taken with the main camera of the phone. I do think the main camera is definitely the highlight of this phone's camera setup. The picture is not bad at all. All the details look pretty good. The contrast is good. Everything is pretty good about this photo. By itself, it doesn't look bad, but compared to a higher end phone, you're definitely gonna see a difference. But that being said, if you do wanna take more basic pictures that you're gonna keep for social media, or maybe something more professional, this phone will get the job done. Now this photo was taken with portrait mode, and in contrast to the last photo, I do think the portrait mode is one of the low points of this camera setup. As you can see here, it's not really a bad photo per se, but for a photo taken in portrait mode, it is pretty disappointing because it looks like portrait mode isn't even working. The background isn't blurred out at all. Pretty much the only difference between this and the photo taken with the main camera is that the photo taken with portrait mode is a little bit more zoomed in and it's slightly darker. Other than that, it's basically the same, and I really can't say that portrait mode works. Now, will it be like this every single time you use portrait mode? Probably not. You're probably going to be able to get a few good photos out of it, but in this specific situation, I really couldn't get it to work properly. So it is a disappointment because in real life, we're not always going to have the most ideal conditions to take a photo, and I would like to see a phone that can at least take presentable photos with the certain mode you want to use. Now this photo was taken with the macro camera, This is definitely not a bad photo, and I think it works a lot better than the portrait mode did. I'm not sure how many people out there really care about macro cameras these days, but if you do want a good macro camera to take those really close-up photos with the small details, then this phone will definitely get the job done. Okay, so unfortunately when I was taking test photos, I completely forgot about the ultrawide camera. But I will say the ultrawide camera is really good quality, and the photos it takes are around the same quality as the main camera, which is pretty impressive because usually ultrawide cameras have some distortion, but the ultrawide camera on this phone really didn't. Now, one thing I will say about the ultrawide camera on this phone is it's a little weird when it comes to activating it. Usually when you're taking a photo on pretty much any phone that has an ultrawide camera, all you need to do is tap on this little icon right here, and it'll automatically engage. But for whatever reason, they have the ultrawide camera as this little icon right here that's really easy to miss, so don't forget that. But in case you do want to learn a little bit more about how to use the controls of this camera, be sure to watch my camera tips and tricks video for this phone on the channel. For video, this phone has a max quality of 1080p in both the rear and the front cameras, so nothing out of the ordinary there. Overall, I would say this phone's camera setup is pretty decent, but if you really want to focus on taking photos, if that's one of the main concerns you have for your phone, then I would say you could do a little bit better, because there are phones out there like the Samsung Galaxy A12 for example, that are around the same price as this phone and have the same camera features but do everything just a little bit better. But if you're not super concerned about the camera, if you just want to take a few nice photos here and there, maybe for social media or something, then again, this phone's camera really isn't bad and it will get the job done. Internally, this phone is getting 4GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio G25 processor. I ran a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on the phone, and it came back with a single core score of 145 and a multi-core score of 857. Now these numbers really aren't bad for this price range. The vast majority of phones in this price range are going to have pretty much the exact same type of scores, but it's not the greatest. So if you're planning on doing more high-end activities like high-performance gaming or video editing, or you just want a really fast phone, then this one might not be the one for you, because while this is going to be fine for basic activities like sending text messages, making calls, browsing the web, streaming videos, and maybe some light social media use, it's not going to be the greatest or the fastest. It is an entry-level phone. It's not quite at the bottom tier, but at the same time, this phone still is very much intended for more basic activities. And if you're expecting something that's really fast and capable of doing stuff like high-performance gaming and video editing, then you are going to be disappointed. But otherwise, for more basic activities, again, this is a great phone for that. Now, while the processor isn't particularly impressive, this phone does have a really good battery. With this phone, we have a 6,150 milliamp hour battery that supports 10-watt fast charging. This is actually one of those phones that has a battery larger than 5,000 milliamp hours, and while that's not super unheard of or anything, it's not common either. I personally would consider a 5,000 milliamp hour battery on the upper limit of normal, and anything over that is going to get an insane amount of battery life. So if you are prioritizing the battery, this is going to be a great phone for that. Not only is a large battery like this one going to get plenty of life throughout the day, you probably won't even need to charge it. That much, but it's also going to have plenty of longevity, much more so than other phones with smaller batteries, because as batteries degrade, when you have a large battery, it's not as noticeable as soon, so as a result, you get to keep the phone for a lot longer without having to replace it. Now, a couple other interesting features about this phone. We do have Android 11, but it is Umidigi's specific skin, so it doesn't come with an app drawer like a Samsung or Motorola phone, which I personally think is kind of annoying. But if you really want an app drawer, you can always get a third-party app or something. Another thing I don't really like about this phone, but at the same time I'm not surprised by it, is that it doesn't have NFC. In case you don't know what it is, NFC is the technology behind contactless mobile payment services like Google Pay and Samsung Pay, and without NFC, you can't use those services. I personally think every phone should have NFC, but unfortunately, that's not the case, and not many entry-level phones have it. All the same, I do wish that this phone did. But one thing this phone does have that I really like is the smart key. Normally, I would be annoyed by a random button that's not the power button, But this is actually not an assistant button. The Smart Key actually has a bunch of different uses that you can specifically customize based on how you use your phone. If you do want to learn more about the Smart Key and how to use it, be sure to check out my tips and tricks video for this phone where I go over all that in more detail. But basically, the Smart Key is a really cool feature that not many phones have, and it's another one of those things Umidigi uses on pretty much all their phones that I think is really cool. But now that we've gone over some of the specs of the phone, let's take a closer look at the actual phone itself. On the left side here, we got the slot for the SIM card and micro SD card, and of course the Smart Key like I just mentioned. On the bottom, we got the microphone, a USB-C port, and the speaker. On the right, we got the power key, and remember, this is also our fingerprint scanner. Got our volume keys. On the top of the phone, we got a 3.5mm headphone jack. I always thought the top was a weird spot for a headphone jack, but then again, it's not like we haven't seen that before. On the back, we got our camera setup and our flash, as well as the thermometer. We got the blue slogan, as well as the logo. And I do think this back looks so cool. Overall, the phone has a decently slim design that's not too bulky, so it's pretty comfortable to hold. The only thing I don't really like about this design is that it doesn't feel very premium at all. In fact, the parts really feel like cheap plastic, and there's not a whole lot of weight to it, which just worsens that effect. But other than that, the design is really practical, and it looks decently nice. So in conclusion, my final thoughts about the Umidigi Power 5. I think this phone is actually a really good phone for its price range that has a couple unique features that other phones like it don't. I really like the Smart Key. The thermometer, maybe not so much. It's not too useful or practical, but at the same time, it really helps Umidigi's devices stand out from other phones because you're not going to get a thermometer or a Smart Key with the Samsung Galaxy A12, despite that phone having some better perks and features and being from a more well-known brand. At the end of the day, most of this phone's features really aren't too much different from the average phone in the price range, but having the Smart Key, a decent display, a good camera setup, and a nice looking design overall does make this phone a really good option for an entry-level phone that I definitely would consider. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope you found this information useful as well. If you did, don't forget to leave a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, and as always, I will see you in the next video.